In this episode of Coffee with Closers, I'm sitting down with Russell Benaroya. He's a partner at Stride Services. Prior to Stride, he founded and exited 2 tech companies, and now he has extensive experience in building companies that are built to sell. He shares some of that wisdom and knowledge on building businesses on principles and how to train and raise leaders that can actually run the organization without the involvement of the leaders or the founder of the organization. So stay tuned for our conversation with Russell.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey Russell, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Sam, great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Most certainly. Obviously, for the audience that never heard of you, can you share a little bit about who you are?
Sure. As you said, my name is Russell Benaroya. I'm a longtime serial entrepreneur, and today I am a co-founder of a company called Stride Services. We offer outsourced bookkeeping and accounting with a national remote workforce serving about 100 clients with about 40 employees in the United States and Philippines.
That's awesome. Obviously, you've had, every entrepreneur has a story of how they came about becoming an entrepreneur, but you had multiple successful prior exits before. So tell me a little bit about that entrepreneurial journey of building those companies.
Yeah, so my first entrepreneurial leap was in 2004. I was about a year out of business school. I was working for an investment firm, a private equity firm, and we'd invested in a healthcare service business. There was a part of that business that really interested in me. Specifically, they were providing some services for people with sleep disorders like sleep apnea, a very common sleep disorder that many people wear something called a CPAP mask to get air down their airway at night. And I thought, wow, what an interesting industry, what an interesting business. And I had been behind the desk investing in other companies for a few years and thought to myself, wait a second, I've never actually run a business. And if I'm ever really going to be a good investor, I should probably, and I have the energy to go do something on my own. And so I left what I was doing, partnered with a buddy of mine from business school, and we started a healthcare service company called REM Medical to own and operate sleep disorder centers. Not knowing anything about healthcare or hiring doctors or any of that, we managed over the course of 5 years to raise some capital, open 5 clinics, and then sold that company in 2009. After that, I was pretty smitten in healthcare, a lot of problems to solve. And I had a conversation with some friends of mine at a health insurance company here in Seattle that were trying to tackle some problems for how to engage consumers to take better care of themselves. And I offered to build some technology that would help people track their physical activity and earn rewards from their health insurance plan. And we started a company called Every Move, raised some capital, and in 2017 exited that business to a company out of Chicago called Higgy.
So obviously you've had those 2 successful exits, and prior to that you were in the venture space. You were with a financial company. What motivates you? Why you keep going at it? Obviously with the new Stride as a new company that you're building, which is a service company.
Yeah, well, that's a deep and complicated question. Why we do this? I think at the core, well, maybe if you ask my wife, it would be a thirst for learning and a desire to continue to find ways to challenge myself on this journey or this quest. The motivation has evolved over time. So I would say in my first startup, my motivation was, oh, other people are doing this. I could do this. They seem to be getting big exits. I should be able to make a lot of money. I'm going for it, right? So it was very destination oriented. And by the way, that first exit was not a successful exit by like economic standards. Today, if you asked me, it's more about how does the business that I own factor into the life that I am trying to design, of which work is a big part of it, but it is not the end goal of what I am trying to create. But that took a long time for me to evolve to that position.
Are you trying to say then it's not like the money and the retirement and the financial security isn't the driver, it's more so like some sort of another level of satisfaction?
If I cannot be in a role where I am enjoying the journey that suits my genius zone, that where I am feeling most alive and get energy, the outcome itself is irrelevant. Mm-hmm. And it just took me a long time to figure out that I have to be fully engaged and alive during the journey, mm-hmm. because the result is largely out of my control.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you've had multiple successful exits and you've built this new company and you've had a lot of different accomplishments in your career. What is one accomplishment you're super proud of?
Well, the accomplishment I am most proud of is not work related, but it was the decision that I made with my family in 2017 to take control of the life we wanted to design. And mm-hmm. I took my 2 teenagers and my wife, and we moved to San Jose, Costa Rica for a year, mm-hmm. Not as some kind of sabbatical, but to do something that we really got energy from and then figure it out from there. That was mm-hmm. probably my biggest accomplishment. Was
there something that you learned from that exercise as a family or even as an entrepreneur?
The learning was that when I took the leap into the unknown, that which I could not know what mm-hmm. would come of it, created the most amazing set of relationships and opportunities that I ever could have guessed. And I think the learning is just have the confidence to take the leap and know, as you always know, you will figure it out. And so the fact that I am the co-founder of a virtual outsourced bookkeeping and accounting firm today is solely the result of moving to another country, leaving myself open to the possibility of a new opportunity, that opportunity coming into my life that mapped to my circumstance, which is, hey, I need to be in a role where I can do it from anywhere, right? Total geographic independence, and then being ready to take it on. Mm-hmm. And the world is big, and I realized that the opportunities are abundant when you open yourself up to them.
Seems like that lesson was a big success story for you this year with the COVID, right? Now you're forced to work remote, and you basically were prepared to do so.
Oh, I know. I thought remote work and geographic independence was so unique and different, and now like we're all doing it. But it's great. It's the future of work, and it's a different way of working, and certainly a different way of leading, mm-hmm. But certainly liberating.
Yeah, I certainly want to come back to the remote work aspect of it when we talk a little bit more about process and things of that nature. Obviously, with building multiple companies, you must have learned a lot of different lessons, good and bad. But what's one of the biggest lessons that you've learned in the process?
I had a amazing coach for a few years. His name's Lex Sisney. Mm-hmm. And Lex wrote a book called Organizational Physics. Hmm. And one of the things Lex taught me early on and allowed me to appreciate is this concept of nailing it before you scale it. Nail it before you scale it. And the concept there is nailing it is defined as product market fit with a paying customer, mm-hmm. for whom you are solving a problem that is willing to pay you and be a good reference, right? Like that's like a really good scenario. Mm-hmm. And only then, once you have fully validated that, should you put more gasoline on the fire. And I think the greatest learning for me is that raising capital is not the signal of success. Mm-hmm. Raising capital is raising capital. Mm-hmm. But when you raise capital in advance of nailing it, the risk is that you scale it prematurely. You scale it before you nail it. Mm-hmm. And so I've had some experience scaling it before I nailed it because we had the capital, we wanted to run as fast as possible, and probably didn't execute in as disciplined of a manner as I would today, with really making sure that the problem we're solving will build a sustainable business.
So when you talk about scaling, obviously it's probably a couple of things, right? The number of customers that you have, the impact that you're having in the company, number of employees, all of those things are a part of that. But in order for you to even nail it, there's a lot of things that goes into making a successful business that you can operate, right? And possibly exit, because no one wants to buy a chaos. They want to buy something that's like a well-oiled machine that can run. So talk to me a little bit about what are some of the things that went into making something to be saying, oh yeah, it's nailed.
Yeah. So I'll bifurcate it into two areas. One is nailing it with the unit economics of the business. So the thing that you sell, whether it be a service or a technology, the revenue that you generate from that, and the very direct costs that go into delivering that. Knowing your unit model intimately is super, super important. What does it cost to acquire a customer? How long does that customer stay with you? What is the lifetime value, right? Those are like metrics, churn, lifetime value. We hear that in SaaS very, very often. So being thoughtful about your unit economic model and being able to articulate that is important. And then the other is, what is the infrastructure, the business of the business that needs to get built in order to support selling more of those units? So the business infrastructure being like, who are the leaders that I'm going to recruit into this business? What is the marketing and advertising that we're going to spend against this? So all of those who am I going to use for bookkeeping and accounting, right? Okay, super relevant to me. But what are those component pieces that create stability in infrastructure that allow those in the business that are responsible for selling units to stay really focused on their zone of genius and just keep driving?
Most certainly. So, and also when you talk about those unit economics and a couple of those other key metrics that you mentioned, but also systems and processes are a key factor in making a business that can ultimately sell, right? Because you don't want the entrepreneur or the founder be the business. Because if they are the practitioner, the glue that keeps the company going, when you remove them, it's a chaos, and then that's not what you want. Talk to me a little bit about how did you go about when you built those two companies that you were able to exit, to build the systems and process? What were some of the things that you had to implement practically to be able to accomplish that?
I'd argue we're probably implementing that a lot better today at Stride than I did in the past. And the whole idea is to figure out how I make myself obsolete and have a business that transcends me as an individual. And so what I would say we're doing today, more so than I did in the past, is really think of the business as a machine. And if I think about it as a machine that has to have systems in place, and those systems need to have really well documented processes for how things operate, and that if we're really clear about documenting how a system works, it's a whole lot easier to zero in on problem areas, identify where in the system it broke, stop the press, resolve that issue, and then systemically resolve it so that it doesn't happen again. So that's at a very tactical level. Think about your business as a machine. But there's also another element of the machine that really matters, and that is the foundation upon which human beings behave in the machine. And that gets back to a structure that we've put in place at Stride, is a concept of principles. Principles, like Ray Dalio's book, Principles, is the set of ingredients or behaviors upon which we all interact as employees with each other, how we address conflict, how we approach challenges, how we behave, both internally and externally. And that framework has been an awesome way to eliminate or minimize drama during periods of change and uncertainty, which we're certainly in right now.
Yeah, most certainly. When we talk about, the people aspect of it, right? One is to document, hey, here's how you do in this scenario, this is how you react, all those things. But there's that variable, which is the personnel that you put into that role. Some people like when you have the person that, you know, may not have the same caliber as the person who wrote this documentation, then you have the personnel problem, right? How do you solve for that to avoid, obviously it comes down to hiring and making sure that you're putting in people that can actually operate, right? But how do you solve for that personnel problem? Because oftentimes it's the people that really is, that can either make or break the business. You can have all the systems and process.
It's a great question. We have a commitment at Stride that we're in the business of helping people that have a thirst for learning achieve their highest and best use, whatever that may be. Now, for employees, it's imperative that we hire people that have a thirst for learning, right? You want to screen for a thirst for learning. But highest and best use may be, hey, your highest and best use may not be what we hired you to do. It may be somewhere else at Stride, or maybe not at Stride. And so the way that we address that is by having a level of transparency and communication with each other, so that nobody's sweeping these issues under the rug, because one of our principles at Stride is get and stay in sync. And get and stay in sync demands that we embrace and address those question marks we might have about an individual's performance, and be able to do it in a way that's really constructive, with a lot of empathy, that says, hey, there's no judgment. It's just like, this may not be the perfect role for your genius zone, and that's okay.
And I think it also comes to the accountability aspect of it. When you're building a team, you have system process and you're putting the right people in place. And you talked a little bit about, you know, some of the things the principles that you make the company run. Is almost like what you're calling principle is like the vision of the company almost, right? Hey, this is what we stand behind. This is what we want to reflect as team and as a company. So talk to me a little bit about how does all that apply to building a strong remote team? Because when you're remote, it actually brings a level of complexity that's much more complicated than having people sit right around you, right? So talk to me a little bit about how do you solve for that?
Totally. And let me correct one thing that you said. Yes, you can have a vision for your business, but unless you translate that vision into practical, tactical means of behaving and interacting, visions or missions can be really cool things on a wall that really don't get translated into a framework for how we execute every day. And what Ray Dalio did particularly well in his book Principles is he was able to translate a principle into something that matters to me in my role, Russell, or to Amanda in her role as accounting lead, right? Or any number of examples. The way that we works very well in a remote environment, really a few things. One is there's a lot of training around these principles when people come on board, because when issues arise, we go back to, what's the principle that we should employ here? So one is common language. Common language for remote workforce, super key. Number two is transparency around goals and objectives. And the technology that we've implemented for that transparency is Asana. Asana is our work management system where all activities, all projects, all prioritization, all owners, all communication around those priorities are embedded into Asana, so everybody knows at any given time what's priority. And then number three is, to the best that we can, leveraging technology to create more cultural connections, work culture connections. So we use an application called Donut to do random coffee chats, or we had a mixology class a couple of weeks ago where somebody taught us all how to make cocktails. Once a year, we all do get together physically, but that still has to happen because connectivity, human connectivity, is still super important.
Yeah, and I think, what you talked about, like, I think the biggest hurdle when we all went remote in such a, in a drastic manner, that everyone was kind of thirsting for that connectivity too, because with the remote work, everybody's just kind of tuned into their own little zone and then just doing what the activities are, and then completely disconnected from the rest of the world. And that, I think that connectivity brings a big, that's the only way you can build a morale and keep the team all connected.
Companies like Zapier and Buffer, and Basecamp. Basecamp's probably the most well-known, but those three have done a really nice job being progressive about sharing their remote workforce strategies, and they've been able to build some pretty large companies totally remote. It's very doable, but for leaders, it raises the bar. You can't be lazy because there's no water cooler checking in, walking by your desk.
Yeah, and I think also we're always doing the chat, and that just think that's communication. Like, oh, we're always in touch, but no, you have to be intentional about really relating to the people, and then actually calling them out when they're not really following the principles. For sure. Right,
and not doing it from the hip, which is not just jumping on Slack and interrupting somebody's workflow. In fact, respecting people's priorities. And if there's transparency around, hey, this is what I said I was going to do this week, this is the status of how it's going, let empowerment, right? Let people do their work. As leaders, we sometimes get scared because we like control of like, what's going on? What are people doing? And then you start to micro manage, and it's disempowering. And in a remote work environment, that's amplified.
You mentioned a couple of different books, and obviously Ray Dalio, everybody knows him as probably the big guy on anything to do with finance. But who has been the biggest influence on your leadership style?
This is an easy one. I'd hold up the book if I had it sitting next to me, but it's the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership by Jim Dethmer and Diana Chapman. That book has been the most transformational for me as a leader and for our organization. Every employee reads the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. We have forums inside of our company around those commitments. And if I had to summarize the book in one or two sentences, it is about understanding how you react to situations and circumstances, and whether or not you can step back and observe your behavior in that reaction, and what is really based on fact versus really based on the stories that we make up that spins us into a tizzy of frustration, anxiety, self-righteousness, all that stuff that gets us amped.
And when we talk about leadership, obviously, there's a big distinction between a leader and a manager, right? And oftentimes we as entrepreneurs, we kind of have to do both, especially we're younger companies trying to build that team. So which mode do you always see yourself operating in, and what have you seen in terms of your mode of operation?
Yeah, leaders can exist at any level of the organization. Leaders exist even if they don't manage anybody. Manage is a function. Manage is a responsibility that sits under that functional framework of organizational design. It means that I am responsible for helping steward a group of people to accomplish a set of goals or tasks. Whereas leadership has nothing to do with whether or not you manage. I think it has everything to do with how you role model the principles of the organization that you're a part of. And so for me, I spend and want to continue to develop, because we're always learning, that role modeling and influencing through my leadership.
What are some common characteristics that you see, aspiring leaders should have?
I think the number one characteristic is to check yourself first. And when I say check yourself first is allow yourself to be a bit vulnerable, allow yourself to have a bit of humility, and ask yourself in a moment of challenge or crisis or consternation, why you're reacting or why you're feeling the way that you are, and have a willingness to be open in conversation to share, hey, I'm having this thought right now that you're not being totally honest with me about this issue, or I'm having this feeling like we're skirting around what the real issue is here, and I just want to share that with you. Mm-hmm. It's not withholding, it's being a challenger, but being a challenger with empathy. That are probably the attributes that I most aspire to want to continue to develop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's I think one of the books, I forgot who wrote it, The Crucial Conversations. What you're referring to is having such crucial conversation, whether it be your colleague or someone who's below you, and that's a tough thing to do. And we want to avoid such things.
Or a client who you're generating revenue from, right? That's tough.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes it's uncomfortable to have such discussions, and we want to avoid those things. So as you know, obviously you've had multiple businesses, you've seen technology evolve. There's probably been a lot of changes in the industry during that time. Has there ever been a time where you were kind of resistant to change as things were evolving from a technology standpoint?
If I had to reflect on the journey at every move, which again was building essentially the mileage rewards plan for your health. And by the way, this was a company that we built out of a program called TechStars. We were a member of the TechStars class in 2011 in Seattle. And your question, my reaction to your question around resistance to change is that I felt we were so far down the path of the product that we were building, but it was slightly askew from where the market really needed us to be. Mm-hmm. And I so desperately wanted to be right versus being curious and open, mm-hmm. that it took us longer than it It took us longer than I wanted it to make, by my own accord, by the way, to make the shift to be more in line with the market need. And so resistance is usually a function of hindering my desire for control, security, and approval, which is essentially what we're all striving for at a certain level. And I wasn't able to find that in myself. I was looking for it externally, and it slowed me down.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, the willingness to listen to somebody else's opinion and being able to admit that maybe I don't have all the answers is a big characteristic of a leader, right? Because you need to be able to listen to other people's opinion and ideas. And otherwise, people may not even listen to you because you're always just shooting down their ideas.
100%.
Has your approach on sales and marketing changed over the years?
Oh, for sure. I'm in a different business now than I was. So one, I'm not in healthcare anymore. And two, I'm not running a technology business. I'm very much running a service business where we're in the business of helping other entrepreneurs get and stay in their zone of genius. As a result of that, I feel like my responsibility is to be incredibly inquisitive, really dig deeply to see if we can solve their problem. Mm-hmm. And maybe we can't. And I think the big change in sales and marketing for me is to acknowledge that if I compromise my standards of how I believe I can serve you, because I don't know if we can serve you, mm-hmm. I'm going to tell you that. I'm going to tell you that up front. And so I'm less hungry for the sale. I'm more hungry for what we say very often at Stride is the win for all. The win for all. If we're not both getting a win for all, it's not a win for all. And so that has definitely evolved.
Yeah, I mean, which I think the Sandler sales methodology kind of talk about the mutual fit concept, basically, right? So you're basically don't want to force the sale. You want to make sure that it is a mutual fit, that you're actually going to help the customer. If not, why even go that route?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
And then basically because of that approach, has your sales suffered, or have you seen that it benefits you more because you're proactively saying, hey, I don't think there's a fit. I can't really help you. You don't fit my ideal customer profile.
When I'm effective as a challenger, right? Classic challenger sales strategy. When I'm effective as a challenger, I come across as a much more trusted partner, which is what I want to be authentically, is what I want to be. And even if we do not close that client, very often they may introduce me to someone else because they see me as somebody who's going to be a straight shooter about sharing what we can and can't do to help that client. It also, by the way, helps drive more client referrals because theoretically we are in fact delivering on our brand promise. And when there's that level of consistency, it breeds or yields a higher net promoter score. So no, haven't suffered. But it's also important to know that I happen to be in an industry right now that's super large. So my swings at the ball or bites of the apple are very, very numerous. So I can make mistakes and learn along the way and not be a detriment to my business, which, by the way, does speak to entrepreneurs that endeavor into an industry to make sure that it's a big enough sandbox so that you can probably make some mistakes and it's okay.
Most certainly. And I think you also speak to the whole concept of specialization too, because you don't want to be everything to everyone, right? And having that focus helps you do more of what you were talking about earlier. You can write process and systems and prepare people to be able to follow, the principles and be able to act on it. But if you have so many variations in your business and the services that you offer and the customers that you serve, then it brings a lot more complexity as well in that.
Yeah.
And has there been any bad advices you've heard from others who've given you advices?
I don't think I can answer that because I don't think anybody has given me bad advice. I think the self-reflection would be how I interpret or internalize that advice, to be quite honest with you. I think everybody's really quite well intentioned, and I've been pretty intentional about surrounding myself with people whose opinions that I value, whether or not I've either taken that advice or perceived that they were giving me the advice authentically. It's kind of probably my own issue.
And what advice do you have for aspiring entrepreneurs that are probably either just getting started or already actively working on some sort of an idea?
Yeah. Think in terms of experiments, that you have a gift, the privilege of being able to run a bunch of really cool experiments to test and validate this problem that you want to solve. Some of these experiments will fail, some will succeed, but think about your business model that you're executing in terms of a set of experiments with a hypothesis, with inputs, with action, and with learning, and then with documentation of that learning, and worry less about the ultimate outcome and more about, okay, what's the next experiment for the thing that we want to learn to keep pushing our business forward. It's a whole lot less expensive to do that, by the way. It's more unemotional, and it's iterative.
Which brings me to a question, because entrepreneurship is a very tough game. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, just because they had an idea, they jump to it, but then they realize it's not as easy as they thought. But what is the mindset that you have that keeps you going, especially after having 2 successful exits and now building this third company?
Freedom. Freedom. Like I don't know if I'm employable necessarily, nor do I aspire to be. It's having the freedom to design my life and feel fulfilled and energized, that I, again, have the privilege to be able to wake up every day and think about how I spend 80% of my time in my zone of genius and just keep working on myself, because that's a gift.
Yeah, most certainly. I think one of the other thing I would think of is, like, as an entrepreneur, we have this idea of creating something new, right? Either recreating or innovating. That also comes to mind in terms of kind of empowering you, right? Because you're able to have vision of things that is not there yet.
Yeah, and there are some entrepreneurs that are awesome runway entrepreneurs. They see something that doesn't exist, and they want to be the creators of it. Awesome. There are other entrepreneurs that look at an existing problem and how it's being solved, and they're like, oh, I think I could improve upon that. Or there's some entrepreneurs that look at an existing problem and say, oh, that's a big market. I think I'm going to dive into, and I'm okay looking like everybody else because there's enough to go around. No judgment, right? But it's a different level of energy and intention for different entrepreneurs. The first one, that's runway, they're really going to swing for the fences. It's going to be pretty binary. They're either going to nail it or they're not. For the one that wades into the commodity market, they may just be building a lifestyle business for themselves, but they still want to achieve that level of independence and freedom, and that's okay.
And especially as entrepreneurs, we need to kind of, we need to have other entrepreneurs around us to kind of keep us, excited and energetic and get ideas and things like that. So do you have any, like a personal coach, or do you belong to any organizations to kind of give you that support structure?
I've had 2 business coaches over the years that I've appreciated greatly. I was a 10-year member of the Entrepreneurs Organization, which is a global network of founders and co-founders. And in our chapter in Seattle, I think today they have like 170 members. That was a very, very rich environment for me. And today I'm also a member of YEC, which has some similarities to EO, but it's national in scope, primarily online, and is a federation of founders and entrepreneurs that are committed to supporting each other in making impact. And it's just nice to feel connected to other folks like yourself. You don't have to spend time explaining why you're never available.
That is true. And obviously, with a growing business and having, you said, about 40 employees, you can't be everywhere. You can't be involved in every aspect of the business. What are some of the things that you're super passionate about that you put your mind into, and where are the areas where you had to raise up leaders or bring on strategic teammates? My
co-founder today, Eric Page, who interestingly enough is the CEO of this business, was my co-founder at Rem Medical that I was telling you about at the beginning of this call, where I was the CEO of that business. So he's my partner again. We've changed roles. And what we respect about each other's genius zones is that he is very much the machine-oriented engineer in how he approaches the problem that he wants to solve. Frankly, if he doesn't have to talk to a lot of people, he's probably super, super happy about that. I, on the other hand, am out in the market at that top of the conversion funnel, wanting to create connections, make introductions, solve problem, guide and mentor. And my zone, where I want to spend 80% of my time, is in that area that I broadly call generating leads and closing deals.
Which brings me to my question about kind of the productivity hack, right? Because you, as like you said, you have your own core functions where you talked about your genius zone. How do you make sure that you're always operating in that zone, and how do you make sure you avoid distractions?
Yeah, I was looking around on my desk for something I wanted to hold up and show you. It's not here right now, but I have 2 jars on my desk. And each week, one jar is filled with 100 paper clips, and the other jar is filled with 0 paper clips. Every activity that I do, whether it's a call, a meeting, a networking event, or speaking event, comes with it a certain number of points. My goal is to generate 100 points a week. I know at the end of the week, if I have 100 paper clips from this jar is now in the other jar. That productivity hack of holding myself accountable in a very visual way to the inputs that I believe drive outputs, right, which is sales, is manifested through that, through those paper clips and those 2 jars. That's one trick for you. That
is something that I've never heard of. That's a very good visual, because I think, the biggest struggle that I have is the urgent over the important. That is, there's always something urgent that catches my attention. And I'm also kind of the breadwinner in our organization, even though we have a couple other teammates. But oftentimes the urgent takes over, that you don't focus on the important, right? And then having some sort of a point system to keep a track of is, I think, is a great way to do that. Well, so do you have like some sort of a point system for, like, hey, if I was on a podcast that was worth 5 points or something?
Yeah, I'm going to get 15 points from this call. And so we built the algorithm inside of Salesforce in our CRM. So different activities create different points, and then we have a report. But the paper clips are a very transparent way to see visually how you're tracking. Now, this is not an original idea. I just finished a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he talked about that as a strategy. Basically, make it visible. If you want to change your behavior, make it visible. And this is one hack I'm trying. We'll see how long it lasts.
Which brings me to one of my struggle that I think I may have mentioned earlier, like the perfectionism really gets in my way of really getting certain things done. And my brother, who's my co-founder, always tells me, the good is the enemy of, the perfection is the enemy of good, right? And so how have you been able to overcome some of that obstacle of not going for the perfection and being able to get things done?
Yeah. Well, one is separating out thinking from executing. So what I mean by that is thinking is work, right? Thinking is hard. Planning is hard. Having a plan takes thought. Executing the plan itself, honestly, doesn't take a lot of thought if your plan is well architected. What often happens is that we're building the plan while we're flying the plane, or we're building the plan while we're executing. And so one of the ways I've been able to better prioritize and not get caught off guard by the urgent at the expense of the important is to be really thoughtful around how I plan my week and my month ahead, document that, it's transparent, hold myself accountable to it by sharing it with others so I don't get distracted. I think that is probably the most important piece of advice I can give, which sounds so simple. Build a plan. Where's the plan? Do you have a plan? And holding everybody in our organization to that construct will save a lot of wasted energy.
Do you also do time blocking that allows people to say, hey, you only get between 7 and 9 a.m. I can do these core meetings within the company or something like that?
Yeah. So I've been in and out of trying variations of that where I'll block my calendar, and I would say one of the best hacks is finally getting a virtual assistant, by the way. I mean, this took me 18 years before I finally realized, wait a second, I don't have to control everything. So I now have a virtual assistant. And yes, I've tried a number of times saying, please only block in these periods because I don't want to have meetings interspersed throughout the day that throw me off. I'm not great at that, by the way, because I really like the opportunity to get on the phone, or in this case, Zoom, and talk. So I think I have some more work to do there. I love the fact that somebody else is scheduling for me, though. I think I can do a better job of compressing it to be more efficient.
Yeah, one of the guests that I had a while back told me about a concept called the meet time, and then the make time. So clearly blocking out when is the make time. No one bothers me when I'm on the make time. That's when I'm doing revenue generating activities or whatever those things are. Me time is okay. You can book me for whatever the meetings or conversation. Me time is for me to refill my energy and my, just whether it be going and thinking exercises or some creative exercises. So
it's a great way to break it down.
Knowing what you know today, what would you tell your younger self to do different or better?
The 3 words that come to mind for me are finish the game. Finish the game. A really good piece of advice that I received from a coach was, when you're in the 4th quarter and there are 2 minutes to go and the scoreboard suggests that you are not winning the game, right? You may be losing the game. I don't believe, he said, that Russell Wilson, which of course he's talking about this in Seattle, right, where I am. I don't believe that Russell Wilson is going into the huddle and saying, guys, yeah, we're probably going to lose. Let's start talking about next week. Let's get out there, right? No. He's like, this is the best play for the information that we have to make the very best call that I can. And he plays to the very, very end, and they don't think about the next game until they've finished this week. And if I had to give myself advice, I think I'd say, hey, finish the game. The initiatives that you've started, or the companies that you've started, or the companies that you've worked for, before you get so antsy about jumping to what's next and the next shiny object, define what the game is for you and what you want to finish, so that you're not ending or leaving something half finished, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Any parting wisdom for our entrepreneur listeners?
You asked me a question about how my sales and marketing strategy have changed. And one thing I didn't share is the amount of work that I'm doing to express myself and share my voice and my thoughts and authentic feelings, both on my own podcast and in some writing that I'm doing in articles. And I'd say like the parting wisdom that comes to mind for me is don't be afraid to express your opinions and thoughts and challenge, and be okay if those aren't all well received.
Well said. Well, Russell, I really appreciate you sparing this afternoon with me and sharing some of your wisdom. Thank you so much and wish you all the best.
Thank you, Samuel. It was such a pleasure today.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by OneIMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.